Blood stained the winter snow, thick and black under the moonlight. She thought she was saving a simple timber wolf, its massive body torn apart by silver arrows. She was wrong. The beast bleeding out on her cabin floor wasn't just a wolf. He was the monster her village feared most. The winter of 1342 brought a cold so profound it seemed to snap the very pines of the Darrowshire woods in half. For Gwendolen Croft, a harsh winter was simply another enemy to outsmart. Living on the jagged outskirts of a deeply superstitious village, Gwendolen was an outcast by blood. Her late father, a physician disgraced for his unorthodox, borderline heretical medical practices, had left her nothing but a dilapidated cabin and a mind full of forbidden knowledge. It was the pursuit of that knowledge, specifically the rare winter-blooming ghost orchid needed for a fever tincture, that dragged her deep into the whispering pines on the eve of a new moon. The wind howled, a mournful sound that masked the crunch of her boots against the powder. Then she smelled it, copper and rust, the undeniable stench of fresh blood. Gwendolen drew her iron-harvesting sickle, stepping cautiously through a thicket of frost-covered brambles. In a small clearing, surrounded by snow churned into a violent crimson slurry, lay a beast of nightmarish proportions. It was a wolf, but impossibly large, the size of a destrier, with a pelt as dark as a starless sky. Its labored breathing sent plumes of steam into the freezing air. As she crept closer, her breath hitched. The creature wasn't just dying from the cold. It had been hunted. 3 crossbow bolts protruded from its thick, muscular flank and shoulder. The fletching was dyed a royal crimson, and the shafts were etched with runes. Silver. The signature weapon of the King's Vanguard, the elite mercenary group tasked with purging the northern territories of the beasts they called lichens. The wolf's golden eyes snapped open. They were fiercely intelligent, burning with an ancient, primal fury, even as death crept in. A low, rumbling growl vibrated through the clearing, vibrating in Gwendolen's chest. She should have run. The village laws were clear. Any association with the dark creatures of the woods was punishable by the pyre. But Gwendolen looked at the silver bolts eating away at the beast's flesh, the black veins of poisoning spreading beneath its fur. She saw not a monster, but a life fading into the dark. "I am not going to hurt you," she whispered, her voice trembling but steady. She dropped her sickle in the snow. "If you want to kill me, do it quickly. But if you want to live, you must let me help." The wolf watched her, chest heaving. Slowly, agonizingly, it rested its massive head back onto the bloody snow, yielding to her mercy. It took every ounce of her strength, a makeshift sled crafted from pine branches, and 2 hours of grueling labor to drag the beast back to her isolated cabin. Once inside the warmth of her hearth, the real nightmare began. Silver was toxic to lichens, acting as a corrosive acid in their bloodstream. To save the creature, she had to pull the bolts out. Gwendolen sterilized her father's surgical tongs in the roaring fire. "This is going to burn," she murmured to the beast, whose golden eyes followed her every move. When she gripped the first bolt and yanked, the wolf unleashed a roar that shook the very dust from the rafters. Its jaw snapped wildly, teeth grazing her forearm, but it fought its instinct to tear her throat out. Blood poured, thick and dark. Gwendolen worked with ruthless efficiency, extracting the second and third bolts, then packing the gaping, steaming wounds with a poultice of crushed yarrow, ghost orchid, and cobwebs to staunch the bleeding. Exhausted, her hands stained to the elbows in lichen blood, Gwendolen collapsed into the rocking chair by the hearth. The adrenaline faded, replaced by bone-deep weariness. She closed her eyes, lulled by the rhythmic, stabilizing breathing of the giant wolf on her floorboards. She awoke hours later to a horrifying sound, the wet, sickening crunch of breaking bone and tearing of flesh. Gwendolen bolted upright. The hearth fire had burned down to her embers, casting long, dancing shadows across the room. Where the massive wolf had lain, there was now a man. He was curled on his side, his broad, violently muscular back facing her. He was completely naked, his skin painted in sweat, blood, and a terrifying tapestry of old battle scars. His dark hair clung to the nape of a thick neck. As he breathed, the newly healed flesh on his shoulder stretched over the muscle. Before Gwendolen could even scream, the man moved with a speed that defied human limitation. In a blur of motion, he crossed the room. A massive, calloused hand clamped around her throat, pinning her violently against the rough wooden wall of the cabin. Gwendolen gasped for air, her hands instinctively grabbing his wrist. He was a giant of a man, easily standing 6.5 feet tall, emanating a terrifying, suffocating heat. But it was his eyes that froze her blood. They were the exact same piercing, predatory gold as the wolf's. "Who sent you?" His voice was a lethal, gravelly whisper, a sound that felt more like a threat than a question. Was it Huxley? Did he think a peasant girl could finish the job? "I saved you," Gwendolen choked out, her vision spotting black. The man blinked. His gaze dropped from her terrified eyes to her blood-soaked hands, then to the blood-stained iron tongs on the table, and finally to the 3 silver bolts discarded on the floor. A profound shock flickered through his golden eyes. For a fraction of a second, the lethal predator hesitated. Then the poison and blood loss finally took their toll. His eyes rolled back, his grip vanished, and a man who weighed over 200 pounds of solid muscle collapsed lifelessly at Gwendolen's feet. Gwendolen slid down the wall, gasping for breath, clutching her bruised throat. She looked down at the unconscious giant, realizing with mounting horror what she had just done. She hadn't just saved a beast. She had brought a werewolf into her home. Dominic Mercer woke to the smell of roasted root vegetables and sharp antiseptic herbs. For a man who had spent the last decade carving his name into the annals of history and blood, waking up in a warm bed with clean linen bandages wrapped securely around his torso, was a deeply disorienting experience. He was the alpha king of the northern packs. His enemies called him the Shadow of the North, a tyrant of unparalleled ruthlessness. He had been ambushed on the southern border by Commander Gareth Huxley, a human warlord who had somehow learned of Dominic's patrol route. Betrayal within his own ranks had nearly cost him his life. And now, here he was, saved by a human, a fragile, maddeningly brave human woman. Dominic sat up, the bed frames creaking ominously under his weight. Gwendolen was across the room, grinding herbs in a mortar. She froze at the sound, her shoulders tensing, but she did not turn around immediately. "If you are going to kill me, please wait until after I have finished this salve," she said, her tone remarkably dry, despite the slight tremor in her hands. "It took me 3 hours to find the right moss." Dominic's lip twitched in what might have been a smirk. "I do not make a habit of killing those who pick silver from my bones." He swung his legs over the edge of the bed. He noted she had draped a large wool blanket over him for modesty, which he carelessly secured around his waist. "Why did you do it?" Gwendolen finally turned. She had intelligent, stormy grey eyes and dark hair pulled into a messy braid. She wasn't classically beautiful in the way the pampered ladies of the high courts were, but there was a fiery resilience in her that commanded attention. "I am a healer," she said simply. "I heal." "Lycans and humans are at war, woman, by the laws of this territory. Harboring me is treason. Then it is a good thing I don't care much for the laws of men who burn innocent women at the stake, Gwendolen replied sharply. She walked over, keeping a safe distance, and placed a wooden bowl of stew on a small stool near him. What is your name? Dominic looked at her. To give a human his true name would be madness. The name Dominic Mercer would bring 1,000 mercenaries to her door by nightfall. Hal, he lied smoothly. I am a sellsword, a cursed one, as you can see. A low-ranking Omega, I presume, Gwendolen said, a hint of sympathy in her voice. Cast out by your pack? I have read that Omegas are often left to die. Dominic, the most feared alpha in a century, nearly choked on his stew. Yes, he said, masking his bruised pride with a cough. An Omega. Exactly. Over the next 3 days, a strange, tense domesticity fell over the cabin. Dominic healed at an astonishing rate, his lethal wounds knitting together in ways that fascinated Gwendolen's medical mind. He watched her work, his sharp, lichened senses picking up the steady, calming rhythm of her heartbeat, the scent of lavender and old paper that clung to her clothes. For Dominic, humans had only ever been enemies or tools, but Gwendolen was a puzzle. She treated him with a mix of scientific curiosity and genuine, unprompted kindness. Deep within Dominic's chest, something ancient and primal began to stir. The beast inside him, usually violent and demanding, was strangely pacified in her presence. It was an impossible realization, the initial terrifying spark of the mate bond. With a human. He pushed the thought down. He had an empire to reclaim and traitors to execute. On the 4th afternoon, the fragile peace shattered. The heavy thud of boots crushing snow echoed outside the cabin. Dominic's head snapped towards the window, his eyes flashing gold. 3 men, he whispered, his voice dropping an octave into a predatory rumble. Armed with steel and silver. Gwendolen panicked. Hide. The route to... cellar. Now! She shoved him toward a trap door hidden beneath a woven rug. Dominic bristled at being ordered around, but knowing his presence would sign her death warrant, he descended into the dark, damp cellar. Moments later, the cabin door was practically kicked open. Gwendolen composed herself, turning to face Alden Miller, the village blacksmith, accompanied by 2 soldiers bearing the crest of the king's vanguard. Alden, what is the meaning of this? Gwendolen demanded. Alden looked deeply uncomfortable, twisting his cap in his hands. I'm sorry, Gwen. Commander Huxley's orders. They're searching every homestead within 20 miles of the Whispering Pines. One of the soldiers, a man with a cruel sneer and a scarred cheek, shoved past Alden, knocking over a basket of dried flowers. We are hunting a monster witch, the Alpha King himself. He was wounded 3 nights ago. If you've seen him, speak now, or I'll drag you into the snow by your hair. Beneath the floorboards, Dominic's blood boiled. He could hear the soldier's heart rate, smell the foul sweat of him. If the man laid a single finger on Gwendolen, Dominic would ding through the wood and rip his spine from his body. Consequences be damned. I live alone, Gwendolen said coldly, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm that Dominic could hear perfectly. And I have seen no wolves, king or otherwise. If an alpha were in my home, do you truly think I would still be breathing? The soldier stepped closer to her, his armor clinking. He leaned in, sniffing the air. It smells like wet dog in here. I possess hound fur blankets, she lied without missing a beat. Winter is harsh. I don't have the luxury of velvet. The soldier glared at her, then spat on her floor. Tear the place apart, he ordered his companion. For 10 agonizing minutes, they ransacked Gwendolen's home, smashing vials and tossing her father's precious books. Below, Dominic crouched in the dark, his claws extending, his fangs scraping his lower lip. The beast was howling for blood. He had to physically restrain himself from protecting her, knowing that revealing himself would bring Huxley's entire army down upon them. Finally, finding nothing, the soldiers stormed out, leaving Alden to cast one last apologetic look before shutting the broken door. Gwendolen stood frozen until the sound of their horses faded into the distance. Then her knees buckled. Dominic burst through the trapdoor, moving fast enough to catch her before she hit the floor. His large, warm hands steadied her trembling shoulders. "You're shaking," he murmured, his voice surprisingly gentle. "The Alpha King," Gwendolen breathed, looking up into his face. Her grey eyes were wide with a sudden, horrifying realization. She remembered the sheer size of the wolf, the way his wounds healed in days instead of months, the terrifying, overwhelming aura of command he projected, even when disguised in a peasant's blanket. She shoved him backward, stumbling away. "You lied to me." Dominic stood up to his full, imposing height. There was no point in hiding it anymore. "I did. You are not a cast-out Omega." Her voice rose in panic. "You are the shadow of the North. You are the beast that slaughtered the garrison at Silver Creek. They attacked my people first," Dominic roared, the sound vibrating the very walls of the cabin. But seeing her flinch, he immediately reined in his temper. He took a slow breath, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "Gwendolen, listen to me." "No!" She grabbed a fireplace poker, holding it out like a sword. "If Huxley finds you here, he won't just kill me. He will burn Darrowshire to the ground. You have to leave tonight." Before Dominic could argue, a loud, frantic knocking came at the door. Gwendolen jumped, gripping the iron poker tighter. Gwen, open up!" It was a reedy, panicked voice. Gwendolen recognized it instantly. It was Kaelin, the old village archivist and her closest confidant. She threw the bolt and yanked the door open. Kaelin stumbled inside, covered in snow, his face pale with sheer terror. He wasn't looking at Gwendolen. He was staring at the massive, scarred man standing behind her. In Kaelin's trembling hands was a bloody cloth, and inside the cloth were 3 silver arrowheads. The very same arrowheads Gwendolen had extracted from Dominic and buried in the snowdrift behind her cabin. "Gwen," Kaelin wheezed, his eyes darting between her and the Lichen King. "Huxley's hounds. They found the blood in the snow. They found the silver. They are coming." Kaelin's revelation hung in the stifling air of the cabin like an executioner's axe. The distant, unmistakable chorus of baying bloodhounds echoed through the freezing night, sending a shard of absolute ice down Gwendolen's spine. The vanguard was not merely searching anymore. They were hunting. Dominic's demeanor shifted instantly. The vulnerable, recovering patient vanished, replaced by the apex predator of the northern realms. His jaw clenched, muscles bunching across his broad shoulders as he stepped in front of Gwendolen, effectively shielding her with his massive frame. "How many?" Dominic demanded, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that commanded absolute obedience. Kaelin shrank back against the doorframe, his eyes wide with terror. "Dozens," the old archivist stammered, his breath puffing in frantic white clouds. "Huxley is leading them himself. They have torches, pitch, and silver netting. They mean to burn the woods until there is nowhere left to hide." Gwendolen's mind raced. The cabin was a death trap. "There is a smuggler's tunnel," she said, her voice shaking but her resolve hardening. "Beneath the root cellar. My father used it to bring in forbidden medical texts. It leads to the cavern system beneath the Whispering Ridge." Dominic looked at her, his golden eyes burning with a fierce, possessive intensity. The mate bond, undeniable and intoxicating, roared in his blood. He would slaughter every man in Huxley's army before he let a single ember touch her skin. "Show me," he commanded. Before they could move, a flaming arrow shattered the front window, burying itself deep into the wooden floorboards. Fire bloomed instantly, devouring the dry rug. "Go!" Dominic roared, shoving Kaelin toward the cellar trap door. He grabbed Gwendolen around the waist, hauling her effortlessly against his side as another volley of arrows rained down upon the cabin. The roof ignited with a deafening roar. As they descended into the damp, earth-scented darkness of the tunnel, the heavy wooden door above them splintered. Heavy boots stomped into the burning cabin. "Find the witch!" a cruel voice bellowed. It was Commander Gareth Huxley. "She bleeds with the beast! Leave no stone unturned!" The smuggler's tunnel was narrow and claustrophobic, forcing Dominic to crouch uncomfortably as they navigated the pitch-black labyrinth. Gwendolen led the way, her hands feeling along the freezing, damp stone. She could hear Kaelin wheezing behind her, and behind him, the silent, imposing presence of the Alpha King. They emerged hours later into a vast, subterranean cavern lit by the ethereal glow of luminescent cave moss. The air was frigid, biting through Gwendolen's thin dress. She shivered violently, her teeth chattering uncontrollably. Dominic noticed instantly. He stripped off his heavy wool cloak, wrapping it tightly around her trembling shoulders. His massive hands lingered for a fraction of a second, the heat radiating from his skin providing instant relief. "You should have left me," Gwendolen whispered, clutching the edges of his cloak. "Huxley only wants you. I am nothing but a peasant girl." Dominic stepped closer, closing the distance between them. In the dim, eerie light of the cavern, his golden eyes softened, revealing a depth of emotion that left her breathless. "You are not nothing," he murmured, his thumb gently brushing a streak of soot from her cheek. "You saved my life, Gwendolen. When my own kind betrayed me, a human showed me mercy. You are braver than any warrior in my pack." His touch sent a jolt of electricity straight to her core. The undeniable pull between them was magnetic, terrifying in its intensity. She looked up at him, seeing the Alpha King not as a monster, but as a protector, a man. Their moment was brutally shattered by a sickening sound, the metallic shink of a crossbow being loaded. Gwendolen spun around. Standing at the tunnel exit, bathed in the sickly green light of the moss, was Kaelin. His hands were shaking, but the silver-tipped crossbow in his grip was aimed squarely at Dominic's chest. "I am sorry, Gwen," the old man sobbed, tears streaming down his wrinkled face. "Huxley promised. He promised he would spare the village if I led him to the beast. He knew about your father's tunnels. He told me to guide you down here. They are waiting at the main cavern exit." Betrayal sliced through the freezing air. Gwendolen stared in absolute horror at her oldest friend. "Kaelin, no!" Before the archivist could pull the trigger, Dominic moved. He didn't just step in front of the bolt. He intercepted it. The silver arrowhead grazed his bicep, tearing a vicious gash through his flesh. Dominic barely flinched. With a guttural roar, he lunged forward, moving faster than the human eye could track. He ripped the crossbow from Kaelin's hands, lifting the treacherous old man entirely off the ground by his collar. "Please!" Kaelin shrieked, dangling in the Alpha's iron grip. Dominic's fangs descended, his eyes blazing with murderous fury. But he stopped. He looked back at Gwendolen, who was watching him with wide, terrified eyes. For her, he suppressed the beast. He threw Kaelin roughly against the cavern wall, knocking him unconscious. "We have to move," Dominic said, his voice completely devoid of mercy. "Huxley is waiting." They navigated the winding, treacherous paths of the cavern, the distant echoes of armored footsteps growing louder with every passing minute. When they finally reached the colossal stone archway leading to the surface, the sight before them was catastrophic. Over 100 heavily armored vanguard soldiers stood in the snowy gorge, torches blazing against the bleak winter dawn. At the center sat Commander Gareth Huxley upon a massive black warhorse, a cruel smile twisting his scarred face. "The great Alpha King," Huxley sneered, his voice amplifying off the canyon walls, "brought low by a peasant's skirts and an old man's cowardice. Surrender, Mercer, or I will have my men peel the flesh from the girl's bones while you watch." Dominic stepped out of the cavern shadow, his chest heaving. The air around him seemed to drop 10 degrees. The time for hiding was over. The time for running was dead. He looked at Gwendolyn, a silent promise exchanged in the frigid morning air. "Stay behind me," he whispered. Then the Alpha King unleashed the beast. The transformation was magnificent and terrifying. Bone snapped and reformed in a symphony of brutal violence. Muscle expanded, tearing through his remaining garments as dark midnight fur erupted from his skin. In mere seconds, the man was gone. In his place stood a monstrous, towering wolf, its golden eyes radiating pure, unadulterated slaughter. A collective gasp of terror swept through the vanguard. Even Huxley's warhorse reared in panic. With a roar that shook the snow from the surrounding peaks, Dominic charged. He crashed into the vanguard line like a living siege engine. Silver swords shattered against his impossible strength. Men were thrown like broken rag dolls into the snowbanks. Arrows bounced off his thick hide. He was a force of nature, a hurricane of teeth and claws, driven by an ancient rage and an overwhelming instinct to protect his mate. Huxley drew his silver broadsword, shouting frantic orders to his crumbling line. "Hold! Form up, you cowards! Bring him down!" But the Alpha King was unstoppable. Dominic tore a path of absolute devastation straight toward the commander. Huxley swung his silver blade, aiming for the massive wolf's neck. Dominic ducked the strike with unnatural agility, his powerful jaws clamping down on the foreleg of Huxley's horse. The beast dragged the screaming animal to the ground, sending Huxley crashing violently into the bloody snow. Before the commander could scramble to his feet, a massive, furred paw pinned him to the frozen earth. Dominic's golden eyes bore down into the terrified human, his heavy, blood-scented breath washing over Huxley's face. Gwendolyn watched from the cavern entrance, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was surrounded by carnage, yet she felt no fear of the monster standing victorious amidst the slaughter. She felt only awe. Suddenly, a surviving vanguard archer, hidden on a rocky outcrop above, drew a bead on the distracted Alpha. He loaded a heavy silver bolt, aiming squarely for the back of Dominic's skull. "Dominic!" Gwendolyn screamed. Without thinking, she sprinted into the fray. She grabbed a discarded spear from a fallen soldier, hurling it with all her might. The heavy shaft struck the archer's shoulder just as he released the bowstring. The silver bolt flew wide, sparking harmlessly against the stone wall. Dominic snapped his massive jaws around Huxley's throat, ending the commander's reign of terror with a sickening crunch. He turned, his muzzle dripping with crimson, locking eyes with Gwendolyn. The remaining soldiers, seeing their leader dead and the unstoppable fury of the Alpha King, broke rank and fled into the winter storm, abandoning their weapons in the bloody snow. Silence descended upon the gorge, save for the howling wind. Dominic shifted back, his human form kneeling exhaustedly in the snow, covered in the blood of his enemies. He looked up as Gwendolyn ran to him, dropping to her knees in the freezing slush. "You foolish, brave woman," he breathed, pulling her fiercely into his arms. He buried his face in her dark hair, inhaling the scent of lavender and survival. You saved me. Again. I think we are even now, Gwendolen whispered, wrapping her arms tightly around his broad, muscular neck, uncaring of the blood. As the sun broke through the heavy winter clouds, casting a golden light over the blood-stained snow, the distant sound of howling echoed through the valley. It wasn't the baying of hounds, but the deep, resonant call of lichens. The northern pack had found their king. Dominic stood, pulling Gwendolen up with him. He kept her tucked securely against his side, his arm an iron band of protection. My pack approaches, he said, his voice resonating with royal authority. He looked down at her, his golden eyes filled with absolute certainty. They will demand a queen, Gwendolen, a mate to rule by my side. The High Lords will balk at a human, but I will tear the throat out of any man who questions my choice. Gwendolen looked at the imposing, terrifying, profoundly gentle man beside her. She had lived her whole life as an outcast, hiding in the shadows of the woods. Now, the king of those shadows was offering her a throne. Let them question, she said, a fierce, defiant smile playing on her lips. I have plenty of silver tongs for anyone who complains. Dominic threw his head back and laughed, a rich, booming sound that echoed across the frozen peaks. The outcast healer had saved a dying beast, never knowing she had just conquered the heart of the most dangerous king in the world. Did Gwendolen's bravery leave you absolutely breathless? The Alpha King found his fierce queen, but their royal journey has only just begun. If you loved this thrilling werewolf romance, full of twists, betrayal, and undeniable passion, hit that like button right now. Don't forget to share this incredible story with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more epic, heart-pounding romantic fantasies. Comment below what you would do if you found the Alpha King. See you next time.